Well, welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. And we just happen to, as ever, we make videos where we can. This is not the core business, but when we get a car in, we clear it with the owner and say, are we at liberty to make a video about this car? And they, more often than not, say yes. So this time round, it's this car that's in the spotlight. Quite an interesting part of Ferrari's history, this actually. This is a 330 GTC Ferrari from built between 1966 and 1969, and it sort of bridges two types of vehicle, really. You had the, well, let me recap. The 330 stands for 330cc per cylinder. So 330 times 12 equals 3,900 and just under 4 litres. So that's where the 330 model name comes from. A lot of Ferrari models of that time, the 275 was 3.3 litre, the 250 was 2.5 litre, 250 times 12, etc. They chopped and changed it as they went along, but this has got, the net result is a 4 litre V12 engine. The reason why I say it's sort of a bridge between two models, the 330 GT 2+2, and this is where you have to be so precise with model description and numbering in the world of Ferrari. The 330 GT 2+2 was just that. It's a car that we featured before on the channel, and it is a 2+2. John Lennon had one. John Surtees had one that Enzo Ferrari presented him with for winning the 1964 World Championship for the Drivers' Championship. So the 330 GT 2+2 is very much a touring car. It's got room for 2 people plus kids or small adults, and it's got a live rear axle, still supported by cart springs under the back. I mean, very, very old technology, really. As ever, they have a big chassis, a ladder frame running underneath them, when a lot of manufacturers, even conservative Rolls-Royce, went onto a monocoque or unitary construction body in 1966. These were still soldiering on, as they did right up to the F40 and beyond, with the ladder frame chassis, with the body sort of laid on top of it, really. But that was what the 330 GT 2+2 had, with a live rear axle, which was very old technology. And the other model that was concurrent with this was the 275 GTB. And I've worked on and driven lots of beautiful 275 GTBs over the years, and they are very special cars. Several 4-cam 275s, which some people consider the ultimate road-going Ferrari, and with good reason. So this car is, you had, on the one hand, you had the sort of saloon, sporting saloon, the 330 GT 2+2. You had the 275 GTB as the sort of sports car, really. That was Ferrari's cutting-edge sports car in, if you wanted a V12 in the late 1960s. But somewhere in between the two was this car. And I've always wondered why Ferrari, what sort of caused Ferrari to make these, because I never quite got it, but I'm getting it now. The car is, it fits between two stools in the fact that it's a quite conservatively styled, dare I say it, but very pretty creation by Pininfarina. But it is a 2-seater. And it's also got the 275 running gear underneath. So that's to say, it's a smaller version of this engine, but the 275, but it's the same engine. Then you have a transaxle underneath, which joins the back of the engine, clutch at the back of the engine, comes down to a flange about that size, a torque tube running along the center console, underneath the center console, and then the transmission at the back. So, but the important thing is the transaxle at the back allows independent rear suspension, which it shared. So all that it shared with the 275, different engine, bigger engine in this, but essentially, what I'm saying is this is a more sporting I am having fun today. It's a more sparkling sporting car than it would first appear, because it's got, at the time, the ultimate road-going Ferrari's underpinnings. Independent suspension's a big deal because it means each wheel has its own geometry and its own way of interacting with the road surface. You're not transmitting a large amount of unsprung weight, as it's called, into the car body, which causes the body to move around because you've got this axle, this heavy beam under the back of the car, which is following the road and trying to make the body do the same. No, independent suspension. Huge amounts of modern cars have independent suspension, and with very good reason. But this was an early precursor of independent rear suspension. A lot of car manufacturers were still not going this route. And alongside the Lamborghini offerings of the time, you had the 400 GT 2+2, then the Espada came out during this car's production, etc. But and the Islero is probably the Lamborghini equivalent of this at the time. But these are sort of, as I say, that they fall between two areas really. The 275 super sporting, 330 GT 2+2, family express, if you will. And then there's this car. But the interesting thing is, people have really grown to love this model. Actually, it's a very interesting and endearing car because you've got those quite conservative looks, but a 4-litre V12 to pull it along, which develops 300 Ferrari horsepower, which is probably nearly that in reality. And the car does over 150 miles an hour and 0 to 60 in just over 6 seconds, which is not to be sniffed at for a 1960s comfortable grand touring car. But the charm of this car is it's a driver's car because of what's underneath it in terms of the driveline, the gutsy engine, etc. It is a driver's car, but it's also quite subtle. It's got a big glass house with great visibility, very comfortable interior, loads of space, lots of room, headroom, legroom, etc. You've got room for some luggage behind the seats and the boot. It's a continent crusher in comfort, I would describe it as, of the 1960s. And that was the appeal of it. It was neither a really throaty, very fast road car like the 275, or it was not a sort of accent on long distance comfort rather than drivability, ultimate drivability 330 GT 2+2. So we end up with this. It's a compromise between a touring car and a very much a driver's car. So that's the preamble as to this car. It's been in for a recommissioning and some running issues. We've traced it to the fuel system. Pete and Les have been working on the fuel system just very recently, and we found that there was dirt inside the carburetors, which is not uncommon these days with lack of use and combined with modern fuels, which can go off quite quickly, really, if they're not monitored or various precautions taken. The car's got 3 carburetors, each carburetor serving 4 cylinders, and the front carburetor, the accelerator pump was not working, which is a small mechanism that squirts extra fuel in as you demand it on acceleration. We've actually cleaned the filters out. We've fixed the accelerator pump. We've done surgery on it. The car is now starting and running nicely. And we're going to take it for a run. And I will explain, we'll put it on the lift and I'll just explain some of why the underpinnings on this car make it such a fabulous driver's car. These cars were bought by people of taste, people who did not want to show off. They did not want to be particularly ostentatious. They just wanted a car that was elegant, practical, and very fast. And there are very few cars in their day, even Aston Martins in the late 60s, were not using independent rear suspension. Lamborghini was the main contender, but this car I haven't covered before. The Ferrari 330 GTC. Well, this is what really differentiates the 330 GTC from the 2+2 and a lot of other cars of this era. We've got this very traditional, very strong ladder frame chassis, as it's called. But that is actually not so terribly awful, because it provides the car with a great deal of strength. The body is actually attached to it quite firmly via a tertiary or secondary framework, and it all works together as a very strong structure, albeit quite old-fashioned, but it does work. But we've got the unequal length wishbone front suspension, which means the top this wishbone is obviously that wide at the bottom, and the top one is that sort of width, which means that the arc of the wheel, as it goes over bumps, it's not enough to scrub the inside of the tyre out as it goes over a bump, but it is enough to compensate for the slight roll of the car in corners and keep that wheel virtually upright. A very clever suspension geometry. I've explained this before in the whiteboard in a previous video. Then as we move along, we've got the bell housing here with the clutch in it. And then, as I was talking about earlier, the torque tube, which is bolted onto the back of the bell housing. It's a solid tube with a shaft with bearings running inside it. And it comes to the input of the gearbox here. And it's a direct link between the engine and the transmission. It's one huge assembly, basically, bolted together, clutch there, and then the shaft comes along to the input shaft in the gearbox. This is called a transaxle because it's got the differential or output shafts going to the rear wheels built into it. The advantage of this is weight distribution, because you've got, instead of all the weight being concentrated at the front, you've got some of it at the back, but it's sufficiently contained within the wheelbase to not adversely affect what's called the polar moment of inertia, which means, like a Porsche 911, you've got the engine hung out the back, or an Audi, you've got the engine hung over the front wheels, a bit like an early Bentley Continental GT as well. It's almost all within the wheelbase of the car, keeping the weight as central. And this is why Porsche, dare I say, copied it like for like with the 924 and that series of vehicles, 928, because it just works so very well. But you can only have a transaxle here if you have independent rear suspension, because otherwise the rear axle will be floating about here and there's nowhere for the gearbox to be, the transaxle. So again, at the back, unequal length double wishbones, same as the front, which gives that fantastic ride handling compromise and makes the car so incredibly sure-footed. This is where the 330 GTC really shines, and it makes it such a fabulous driver's car. You can see where the money is in the exhaust system. It comes out of the manifolds at the front there and then comes into these silencers. And then there's resonators built into the tailpipes at the back. It's a very expensive exhaust system, and that's because it's very complex. But this is what you get for a V12, which was state of the art in a lot of ways, apart from those people at Lamborghini who had put four cam cylinder heads on their engines, but we won't talk about that for the moment. But that's what you get if you get a V12, and this sounds so gorgeous because of that exhaust system and everything working together. I'm super, super happy this car has come back to life, and I think the owner is going to be absolutely delighted with the way this car is driving. Well, I'm going to tune the engine as ever. I'm going to just balance the carburetors before we do take it on the road, to make sure it has a sporting chance of being able to run at its best. I do suspect this engine is a bit bunged up, even though the piston rings are doing their job, but we'll see what the road test brings. So I'll just quickly gain access to the top of the carburetors so I can hear what is going on, and then we'll get to it. Yeah, these are running rich. I'm going to use my special motorcycle adjusting tool. And as you can hear, the revs are rising as I screw this in, which means it was too rich. Now they're dropping because I'm leaning it off. There we go. And then we move on to the next one. There we are. I suspect these are all going to be far too rich, which means somebody who doesn't know what they're doing has been tuning these. This is a tricky one to get to. There we go. And the last one. That's it. Right. So the idle mixtures are all lovely now. What I'm going to do is just bring the idle speed down. Okay. They're all just about even, so I'll just bring them down evenly. That is beautiful. There we are, perfectly tuned Ferrari V12. No electronics, just synchronization with adjusting screws. There we go. This car is in beautiful condition. It really is. If I'm not mistaken, the colour of this car is blue Hyperion, which was a standard Ferrari factory colour in the late 1960s. And I'm just warming it through. It's the first thing that struck me about this car, having driven a quantity of them over the years, is that the suspension is a little bit tougher than it should be, and that's normally because the dampers, the shock absorbers, have partly just got stuck. So, but normally we can just gently warm them through, and they free off and return to the proper compliance. But yeah, it's and also the drive line is just, I suspect there's an exhaust or a part of the gearbox or prop shaft or engine mountings touching somewhere. I mean, it's the tiniest thing. It's hardly worth bothering about, but you know, we are looking for perfection. But these are symptomatic of cars that aren't driven very much, and you can understand why. I mean, this car is worth thick end of £500,000. Interestingly, the same as a Daytona. The subject of Ferrari pricing and hierarchy is an interesting one. The 330 GT 2+2 is worth approximately half this, which I suppose is to be expected because it's not quite as uncompromising, but still a lovely car. And the 275 GTB is now worth a minimum of £1.5 million, I would say, maybe a little less. Entry level, short nose 275 GTB, but yeah, I'm just quietly bringing this to life. They do take a while to warm up because the gearbox is at the back, and the heat has to percolate from the engine right the way along the torque tube assembly to the to the back end, to the gearbox, but it's all working. Yeah, it is already beginning to supple up the suspension. I suspect, as I say, this car hasn't been used for a while, but Pete and Les have fixed the accelerator pump, which was, it had actually come out of the housing. It's a small metal insert, and it just needed adjusting and refitting, and that's all done. And this one thing about this car is it's beautifully roomy. I mean, I'm long in the body. I'm 6 foot tall, but long in the body, and I actually have got headroom. You can fit my hand between my head and the roof, and that is a big reason for these, because they were a Gran Turismo car. Interesting combination of subtle looks, but almost race-derived suspension. Oops. Don't want to do that too often. Just nursing the gearbox because it's still not warmed up. We restored a 275 GTS some years ago, which is what the styling of this car is based on. It's basically one of these with a smaller engine and no roof, and they're all very similar around this age. But I wonder which came first, the convertible design or this design, the coupe. We will probably never know, because they don't necessarily correspond to when the cars were introduced and on sale. The magic is beginning to appear. These must be respected and warmed up properly. If you are fortunate enough to own a Ferrari like this, my advice is start it from cold with a few pumps of the throttle, and then fast idle it for about 1500 at about 1500 RPM for a few minutes. Do not let it sit outside your garage idling while you close the garage door at 500 RPM, because that will kill the valve gear. It really will. And that beautiful clunk of the Ferrari gear gate, which is just such a feature of these cars, so satisfying. Good. We've got some T's and P's. Let's see what we've got. Let's open the taps. There was loads of smoke came out of the exhaust there. I suspect this car has not been driven like this for a very long time. But it's very quick. The tail dips, the nose goes up. Beautiful. And the smoke is getting less, which is always a good sign. We have done oil pressure and cylinder leak down tests on this engine, just to make sure it is in apple pie order, which it is. They were all very good. I mean, we've got fantastic oil pressure. It's exactly where it should be, towards the middle of the gauge. The car is beginning to come alive now. The suspension really is beginning to smooth out, and it's very comfortable. It's fully understandable why these cars are worth so much money. They are just a very, very good package. This engine is redlined at 7,000, unlike the 4-cam 275 and Daytona, which are up to 7,700. So this is more about low down torque comparatively. It'll never be an American V8, but it does pull strong power right up to 7,000 revs. We've got a clear road. I'm just going to try and see if how things are looking now. better. Yeah, hardly any smoke out of the exhausts that time. We're clearing its lungs, we're bringing it back to life. Yeah, this is a good day in the office. I'm enjoying this. The gearbox is lovely now, it's warmed up. This is a very, very nice place to be, and genuinely torquey. Loads of mid-range there, about 3,000 RPM, and it's a very linear power curve. It's not like a 275 GTB where it starts to come on the cam at sort of 4,000 RPM. It just pulls all the way right up to the red line. Very nice. I suspect what's been happening with this car is it's been cold started, shunted round, stopped quite a bit. And I suspect some of the smoke that we were seeing is because the piston rings can take a set in the pistons. They can actually gum up in the pistons with a bit of carbon and not actually be expanding properly against the cylinder walls. But having said that, the leak down readings were superb, so it could just be lots of carbon in the exhaust, etc. We'll just try it again. That is a different car. Absolutely beautiful. Oh yes, the suspension's settling down. It's so poised. This car is so poised through the bends. Absolutely gorgeous. You can feel the balance. Yeah, there's no smoke at all from the exhausts now. Cleared out beautifully. I'm very happy about that. Absolutely no smoke on acceleration or deceleration. That means everything is working beautifully. The car would not pull like this if that accelerator pump wasn't working on the front carburettor. It just simply would not pull. It would bog down. So, oh. Such torque. Yeah. This is a lovely prancing horse. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be back with something else very soon.